Hello guys, this is your friend and we are back with a new fanfic. And if you enjoy this fanfic, then please press the like button and subscribe to my channel for more fanfic like this. And now let's start the fanfic.
Karin awoke to the sound of water. Her head was pounding and felt tightened. She tried to stand, but there were strange seals on her body that restricted her movement and made her legs almost completely worthless. She tried her hardest to get back up, but there were chains wrapped around her arms and legs. The chains went from her limbs and out towards two other people on the other side of the cave. One was a burly man with a large nose while the other was a shorter and skinnier man. They too were chained together with the chains leading up to Karen's own binds. The redhead looked around quite happy that whoever their attackers were, didn't remove her glasses. She took a deep breath to get a good look of her surroundings. She moved her arms around and felt that the three scrolls that she and Naruto had achieved were still with her. She bent her head down and pushed the glasses back up her nose and rested them perfectly at the bridge. Her crimson eyes trailed over and throughout the cave system. There was a series of 8 tunnels that went for who knows how far. Torches were placed at either side of each opening, giving the entire room a slight ambiance of uncertainty. On the far side of the room, there was a series of cages locked with multiple chains and bars to keep whatever was within, hidden. Karin struggled to keep her consciousness but continued to manage. There was a sickening feeling within her gut that told her that this was no longer the Chunin exams, at least this wasn't part of it. There's no way in hell that this is planned. Karin shut her eyes and started getting a good feel of the entire cavern system. Rooms were filled with strange shinobi and chakra signatures that she didn't recognize. This is something entirely different. If these were shinobi that I haven't sensed before, but were allied with Suna, then why would they be in questionable caves with 3 genin locked up? No, they have to be bandits or a part of Wait. No, it can't be. Karen's eyes widened when she got to the final signature. She nearly fainted when she sensed the chakra. It was completely explosive and filled with a strange fire, almost as if it were constantly feeding, never ending. She delved deeper and deeper, trying to see if she was right or just crazy. Her mind drew closer and closer. It's Didera, but he's dead. She looked around with a confused face, as she started to sense more and more familiar chakra signatures that she was sure were gone. Many of whom were a part of the Akatsuki, while others were just fodder shinobi that she might or might not have had a role in killing. She struggled in her chains and barely held strong against the binds. She stared off into the dim lighting of the cave as new chakra signatures filled her senses. There were men and women of all sizes surrounding the room. One thing was certain: they weren't here for the exams, or rather, not for the same reason Karin was. Some people had malicious chakra that seemed to eat away at the air, giving Karin the sensation of tunnel vision. But nothing would be as bad as the Kyuubi's chakra, nothing. Hiro, Akatsuchi, Karin whispered out towards the 2 Iowa shinobi chained to the walls on the opposite side of the cave. The 2 teammates of Kuratsuchi groaned and looked up at their fellow prisoner. Akatsuchi had a massive cut over his large nose with a dangerous-looking gash over his forehead and a black eye. Hiro was disheveled with a few scars on his cheek, but otherwise fine. The 2 were chained quite loosely. Well, Akatsuchi was just too damn fat for the chains that these bandits had, so they wrapped chains around his arms and body, completely restraining the fat man. Are you 2 all right? Karin groaned. Just a headache is all, Hiro replied. Do either of you remember what happened? Where are we? From what I can tell, it's a hideout for some bandit group, or something of that sort, Karin replied. I am sensing a lot of chakra signatures in all directions. Many are quite large and probably Junin-leveled reserves. Are you sure? Hiro asked. Positive. Karin nodded. From the chakra that I'm sensing, there is a probability that there are at least 5 shinobi of S class or higher. Maybe. I'm not entirely sure. I see. Akatsuchi nodded his head. Well, these bandits haven't done their research well, it seems. What do you mean? Karin looked at him with a confused look. These are wrought iron chains. They can be easily broken with my ninjutsu. Akatsuchi smirked. Just watch Karin-san. The shinobi leaned his head back and quickly shot it down, regurgitating a large flow of rocks and pebbles that merged together, forming two golems that quickly wrapped their teeth around the chains and began to eat the metal. Akatsuchi suddenly felt rejuvenated. It seemed that the chains were imbued with chakra. Ironic that the tools used to keep them bound were the instruments to their escape. Akatsuchi pushed himself from the wall and limped over to Karin and grabbed the chains from the wall, snapping them from their bases. The red-headed girl gave Akatsuchi a nod and walked over towards the center of the room and started channeling as much chakra as possible, and still be able to suppress it. Akatsuchi went ahead and removed the chains binding Hiro. Hiro ran over towards one of the entrances of the cave and placed a hand on the rock, only to be stopped by Karin. She looked at him and shook her head slowly, making sure that Hiro got the message. From what she could tell, there were at least 30 men down that tunnel and probably 13 in the two tunnels on either side of the one Hiro was about to go into. After successfully saving their lives, Karin spun on the heel of her sandals and walked back and forth, pacing with a thinking pose stretched on her face. She studied the patterns of patrol and the amount of shinobi within each patrol. Hell, even the entire compound of wherever the hell they were. One thing was for certain, they were underground, but most importantly of all, Naruto was gone. She sighed deeply and nearly felt the tears form once again in the corner of her eyes. Naruto was really gone. She looked around and quickly pinpointed on one of the tunnels that lead towards a large but thin opening. She motioned for the two men to follow and quickly took off without the use of a flame or light to brighten her path, but instead, she merely relied on her sensing ability. She took multiple lefts and rights, and almost even sprang a few booby traps that she might have forgotten of. But even though there was no light, she could still see as clearly as can be. She stopped when the sound of rushing water blasted in her ears. There was water nearby, that meant a water source. The rushing sound made her parched throat get drier. She could sense the rushing waves, but she could not sense where the obstacles were. She looked left and right, trying her hardest to catch on to whatever escape path there is, but it was nigh impossible to do so in complete darkness, even with her special ability. Suddenly, from behind, Akatsuchi and Hiro showed up with torches and bloodied rock clubs in their hands. Akatsuchi gave her a nod and looked around, illuminating the entire cavern. Akatsuchi narrowed his eyes at one point in the dark horizon and found a dim light at the end of the darkness, directly ahead of them. Akatsuchi grabbed Karin and started hauling through the tunnel, but because of his excitement, the echo and vibration went through the tunnel and joined in with the atrium that the other prisoners were in. From there, the vibrations shot out and entered the other tunnels and led to the defenders. Karin sensed their sudden change in emotion as their once blue chakra turned into a light shade of red to signify their anger or rage or even the readiness to end the life of someone else. Karin screamed and asked Akatsuchi to drop her. The large shinobi complied and slowly lowered her onto the ground, but just as her feet touched the ground, an arrow snagged just in between her heels, nearly impaling her feet in their power. Karin took a deep breath and sighed. This wasn't what she wanted to deal with so early in her escape. We need to get to the end of this tunnel this instant. Karin roared as she ran farther ahead than Akatsuchi and Hiro. Shouts and screams echoed through the cave as men and women, shinobi and kunoichi, drew their weapons. Their unsheathing weapons made the hairs behind Karin's neck stand. She didn't dare to look back, but she could sense their intent. They were intending to kill them. What they were going to do with their bodies afterwards, Karin didn't know, nor did she want to know. All she wanted to do was get out of the cave system with the other two shinobi. It was slightly confusing to her. The last time she was conscious, she and the other two shinobi were in the desert running from the cavern that killed both Naruto and Kuratsuchi. Then, from that point on everything was a blur, almost as if their memories were wiped, almost wiped. Karin still retained some memories, and even some images of the time in imprisonment and the time that led up to it. She shut her eyes to try and drown out the shouts echoing around her, but she couldn't get the chakra signatures from her head. Every time her eyes would close, the chakra from the shinobi in the other tunnels would funnel into her sensing abilities and completely shroud her field of view, and nearly blind her from all sides. Suddenly, a shuriken whizzed right past her ear, nearly cutting off a few strands of hair from behind her right ear. The shuriken embedded into the wall in front of her and Akatsuchi. The two nearly froze in their tracks, but Karin was the first to shake herself from their fear-induced reverie. She quickly grabbed the burly shinobi and grabbed Hiro with her other arm, and the three hightailed it from the caver system. As they ran, shuriken and kunai were thrown at them from behind, surprisingly, missing the three every shot. It was almost as if they were purposefully missing. Either that or these shinobi were the shittiest shinobi Karin had ever encountered. How fast can you two release ninjutsu? Karin shouted as kunai and shuriken clanked and bounced off the rocks and boulders lining the sides and walls of the tunnel system. As fast as they need to be. Akatsuchi replied while speeding through hand seals. Doden. Doryuaheki. The tunnel behind them collapsed on top of the shinobi chasing them. Their screams were the last thing heard before the tumbling rock and bouncing pebbles rung in their ears, drowning out all other sounds. But all of a sudden, one of the wall sections burst off from the wall and shot out, blocking the pathway, nearly causing Karin to stumble over the attack, and cause her to fall behind. Akatsuchi saw this though and channeled chakra into his body and simply bore through the obstacles, showering the walls and those behind and in front with pebbles, dust and dirt. More and more obstacles were shot out at them, but the burly shinobi simply bashed through them, rendering them completely useless. Karin was grabbed by Akatsuchi and placed onto his back, and the three shinobi took off through the cave and out into the open. Akatsuchi punched through the white covering of the entrance of the cave and quickly slowed himself down along with Hiro. In front of them was a beautiful oasis with palm trees and fresh water. Karin was about to get off of Akatsuchi's back, but there was a sudden disturbance with the normal chakra clouds. There were some really powerful shinobi with chakra reserves equal to that of Anbu commanders and the like. The most powerful of them all was apparently staring at him through his training. The girl quickly pushed Akatsuchi forward as one of the powerful chakra signatures shot a fire technique at the three. In a sorry attempt to fight back, Karin missed with one of her lesser shinobi attacks while Hiro and Akatsuchi were shooting rocks and boulders in different direction, or at least whatever direction Karin said that the enemies would be in. No one could tell for sure, but since Karin was known for being a censor, they knew that she was most likely going to be fine. 10 hours earlier, scorpions of varying size wandered through the desert sands, picking at different rodents that chose to come out at this time of the evening. The sun was falling and heat was fleeting. Animals rose from their hideouts and began to run over the desert in search for food and possibly empty holes to lay their young or even eggs. Snakes slithered about, devouring their prey without a second thought. The desert was quiet for the entire hour, minus the howls of desert wolves and foxes. Rattles at the ends of rattlesnakes shook and jangled, breaking the attention of some of the other more potent hunters of the desert biome. It was relentless, trying its hardest to eat as much as it can before the hawk or eagles can swipe him off the ground. But everything was converging for one spot. It was a large oasis in the middle of a hole. Up into the air were walls that were almost as high as the cavern that Naruto and Kuratsuchi fell into. From the edges of the hole, sand flowed over the side, filling the bottom with sand and dirt, making an oasis underground. Rocks were suddenly moved from the rest of the pattern of the hole. Soon enough, the rocks exploded outwards, showering the inhabitants with pebbles and stones. From the cloud of debris stood three shinobi, 2 male and 1 female. The female of the group was a bespectacled redhead. The other 2 were average men of Iowa. One was a 6-foot-tall boy with a fat build and a nose to match. Next to him was another boy, but he instead was only about 5 feet and 3 inches with a normal-sized nose and dark black hair. They were covered in dirt and small scars, but they were managing. Karin took a deep breath and shut her eyes and gasped with surprise. They weren't being followed anymore. It seemed that whoever held them captive gave up on them escaping. It was definitely something she was looking forward to. Karin opened her eyes and motioned for the two Iowa shinobi behind her to follow. She followed her ears, and soon enough, she found the oasis with flowing water. She and the other shinobi charged for the oasis, scaring the desert animals and creatures back into their hiding holes in the sand and rock face. Karin dumped her face into the water and soaked up as much as she could. She was ridiculously thirsty, especially after being in a cave for an undetermined amount of time. She really needed this. She looked up into the sky and found that the night was dark and the moon was up. She was in awe of what she saw though, stars. There was an ocean of stars flooding the night sky with their lights and wonderful colors. She could see star clusters and even gas clouds from far in the universe. But what really got her attention was the North Star twinkling in the far distance. She looked down and looked at the other shinobi with her. Hiro had a massive gash on his back from a Fuma shuriken not too long ago, and Akatsuchi was still trying to nurse his wound from a bladed trap from within the tunnel. She looked back down at her wrist and found that her watch was still operational. The time was about 2000 hours. Only 4 hours until the second day of the second stage of the exam. We were running through the tunnel for about, I'd say, 2 hours maximum. Karin surmised. So we woke up at about 6 p.m. How long were we in there? Naruto and Kuratsuchi fell at around midday, so 12 p.m. to 1 p.m. Well, that doesn't matter. What does matter though is, who were those shinobi? And what were they doing with dead nuke nins? Karin kept thinking but shut her mind off and dunked her face back into the clear water of the oasis. She shot her head from the water and ran a hand through her hair to help dry it off a bit, but suddenly, a blast of emotion shot through her body. It overwhelmed her at first and nearly caused her to topple over and into the water of the pool. Her eyes were wide. She pushed her glasses up to the bridge of her nose and focused on the emotion. It was like laughter or even happiness. There was some worry and even some wariness in the emotions, but it was so amazing, Karin couldn't ignore it. She gathered some chakra and soon enough, tears began to fall. She gripped her head and collapsed onto her knees as the emotions grew stronger and stronger. Her chakra fluctuated in a way that said it was excited. The emotions were surrounding her like a warm blanket. But she continued to cry. She gripped her head tightly, trying to make sure that she was ing up. Her face scrunched up as the tears fell harder and added to the oasis pool. She bit her lips softly and tried her hardest to hold back her hiccups. She trembled and shook. There was only one person who had emotions like that. There was only one person who can cause her to become like this. Naruto's alive. Oh, 8 hours earlier. Karin followed the trail of Naruto's chakra as best as she could, while trying her hardest to keep her own emotions from clouding her vision. It's true that when you're emotionally compromised, you are the most dangerous. It's a fact when you're someone like Karin. If she didn't keep her emotions reined in, she might lose track of Naruto's own trail and end up going in circles trying to find her own chakra signature. She followed the cave systems trying to build an imaginary map of the entire cave and tunnel complex, but ended up finding a lot of dead ends and rooms filled with enemy shinobi. She placed her hand against the walls and sent out a small chakra burst to act as a sonar wave. She sensed the chakra bounce around and wash over rooms and over other tunnels, but there was one that the wave's chakra moved faster over and even went around a few times before returning back to her. If it's moving that fast, there's only one meaning: fire. Karin placed her fingers underneath her chin and went through the informations for a few moments and looked back down at her watch. It was 11 p.m. The moon was almost right above them and was already blaring down onto the hole in the ground and started illuminating the tunnels, making them start to lose their way once more. This place is a death trap, almost as if it was designed to make unwanted visitors or hell, even prisoners like us, to never make it out alive. Karin groaned. I need to get to the other room and help Naruto and Kuratsuchi. We need to get out of this godforsaken hole of a trap and get to the cages and tell them of what happened. She followed a path that was barely visible, and almost seemed like another dead end, but Karin motioned for the two shinobi with her to follow anyway. They were nervous, especially since they were burning through nighttime that could be used for sleeping. Akatsuchi was carrying a sleeping hero on his back while the three traveled through yet another tunnel. This was probably the shittiest test Karin has been in. Even memorizing Orochimaru's underground complexes weren't this hard. Karin kept at it though, and led the two shinobi behind her to the best of her abilities. Her crimson-red eyes examined each rock and each crevice trying to make sure that she didn't miss any hidden rooms or even hidden switches. Suddenly, a warm and powerful gust of chakra hit her, making her knees weak. Naruto was smiling. She could sense his dream and how calm it was. Her mind, too, became hazy and almost unresponsive, but that didn't matter. She turned back to see Akatsuchi and Hiro plopped against the wall, fast asleep with a blanket over themselves. "I'd might as well sleep too." Karin yawned and yet another wave flowed over her, this time, blowing her from her feet and onto her back. But, instead of hitting hard rock, she was met with the soft feel of waving grass. The warmth of the sun was perfect for her bare arms and bare navel. The sun, though, was suddenly blocked by the silhouette of a man's head. The girl squinted her eyes and soon enough, the shadows became dim and Naruto's face began to take shape. A breeze rolled in, blowing through their hair and through the long grass surrounding them. He had a small smile as he looked over her features. She was blushing madly, but she too was smiling. Suddenly, she flipped Naruto over and straddled the boy for a good few minutes while keeping their eyes locked, red and blue. Karin gulped softly as a ball was stuck in her throat. She didn't know what to say. Apparently, neither did Naruto. The two of them giggled like madmen, before bursting into laughter. Karin pulled the blonde from the grass and placed her forehead against his, making sure that their eyes remained locked with one another. His breath was heavy, but smelled a lot like minty ramen. Karin was about to laugh once more, but Naruto pushed forward and laid her against the grass, but this time, with his lips pressing against her. Her hands began to roam up and down his chest with her left hand wrapping around his shoulder while the other going for the zipper of his jacket. As their kiss grew hotter, she began to zip his jacket down to reveal a shirtless body underneath with muscles that she always dreamed of placing her hands against. Naruto moaned when her warm hands were placed against his cold chest. Soon enough, she began to work on her own shirt and zipped it right open, allowing her to pop free of her jacket. The two of them broke their kiss and stared at one another, as they both moved as fast as possible to remove the clothes from their chests. Karin's face was on fire, as was Naruto's. He leaned back in for another kiss. Suddenly, there was this strange feeling at her side, almost as if someone was kicking her. The image started fading and soon enough, Naruto disappeared. The sun and the grass disappeared, the warm gusts of wind disappeared. The smell of minty ramen vanished. Now, she was left with the dimly lit darkness of the cave she fell asleep in. Next to her were Akatsuchi and Hiro staring at her with worried expressions. Karin looked up at them and realized that she was blushing quite heavily. Her body was covered in sweat and her hands were in rather inappropriate places. Her eyes widened from behind her glasses. She at least had enough dignity to look away. She growled slightly and the two Iowa boys quickly got the message. "Holy shit, I was that wet." Karin's eyes widened and her breath hitched. "This is not good. I need some alone time with Naruto soon." She retracted her hand from within her shirt and from her pants and quickly brushed herself off, trying to retain any dignity she had left. She stood up with her eyes trailing around in different directions and quickly looked down at her watch. "It's 5 in the morning." Karin sighed. "I guess we should just go ahead and continue looking." She walked over towards one of the walls and started knocking chakra into the stones, vibrating the walls and sending vibrations back towards her. She need to find the two shinobi locked on the other side. She dashed through the stones when she sensed Naruto's body from the vibrations. But there was something that astounded her too. 2 of the 3 bones that stabbed the boy's heart were removed completely. A smile formed on her face when she found that his heart was completely intact and working perfectly. She looked over to the side to see Akatsuchi gasping for air. Karin tilted her head slightly, but then Hiro came out with a chocolate bar and shoved the candy into the fat boy's mouth. That was exactly what I needed. Akatsuchi sighed. Oh Kami, he's exactly like Choji. Karin said with wide eyes. She shook her head and walked ahead of the two boys knowing that they were probably still tired. She traced her hands against the walls and followed the trail of chakra she sent out. There was a sudden spark in the back of her mind. She took off into the rocky cavern while calling for the two shinobi behind her to follow. They groaned and stumbled to their feet, but they quickly realized that Karin was way ahead of them. Oh, present time. Karin was running for almost 3 hours straight, much to the ire of the two Iowa shinobi. She punched through walls and rocks with strength that she only reserved for when she was pissed off, and she had successfully terrified the two boys with not only her strength, but also her innate babbling. The poor redhead was shouting incoherent words and indecipherable sentence structures, which had the two boys worrying about her mental state. She jumped up when she sensed that Naruto's chakra was getting stronger and stronger. She her fist back and rammed it into a wall, just a few yards away from the blonde. Once the debris cleared, the girl plowed through the smoke and rolled out into the rocky floor below. Once she gained her footing back, she looked back up through the sky and realized that it was once again morning. The sun was barely able to light the caver because of how deep it was. Looking around, she could smell a fire and the remnants of what seemed to be rabbit or some form of meat. She motioned for the two shinobi behind her to follow and kept her back to the cavern walls. She threw up the tiger hand seal, and received a better picture of Naruto and Kuretsuchi's situation. As it was, Kuretsuchi had successfully awoken Naruto from his sleep. But, there was a shout of pain, and Naruto's chakra rippled and went haywire. The chakra signature went in all directions, almost as if something had just been stabbed through his body. Karin focused as the two shinobi took off for the others. Her eyes widened once more. Tears fell as the pain from the bone seared into her heart. I have to hurry to him. Oh shit, Naruto. Kuretsuchi cried out. What's wrong? What did I do? Nothing. Kuro-chan, it wasn't your fault. Naruto groaned as a large trail of blood flowed from the corner of his mouth and onto the ground below. Don't worry about me, I'll be fine. Kushina, the bone. Don't tell me. It's pierced the aorta. Wait a second, it's that teammate of Naruto-kun's. Kushina replied. She's gonna heal him. Karin slid down on the rocky floor and grabbed Naruto tightly. The boy was quickly losing consciousness and blood. She rolled up her sleeve and forced Naruto to sink his teeth into her arm. The effects were instantaneous. Naruto's once sickly-looking appearance was quickly replaced with that of a tanned and completely healthy-looking blonde. Karin struggled to keep from moaning, but she couldn't help it. It escaped her mouth, but only Kuretsuchi could hear it. The redhead was also blushing quite brightly. But within a few moments, Naruto's blood stopped leaving his body and his chakra had returned to normal. His breathing wasn't as rugged, and his heartbeat was nice and smooth. Karin sighed in relief and laid the boy down onto the ground. Rest up a bit. She looked up at Kuretsuchi with a nod and sat down against the wall of the cave. Naruto suddenly started snoring. Karin looked off into the cavern trough and sighed in relief. Thank you, Karin. Kuretsuchi sighed. I was about to start freaking out. Nah, there's no need for that. Karin leaned her head against the wall and pulled out a food bar. It's been a while since I've been able to eat. Akatsuchi. Hiro. Kuretsuchi cried out. They're okay. What happened to you two? We don't know, Kuretsuchi. Akatsuchi replied. We need to get a message out to the cages. There's something else going on in this desert. I almost forgot. Karin sighed. We were somehow captured by who knows who, but we broke out about, 12 hours ago. What were their ranks? Kuro quickly asked. Many had Junin or higher-leveled chakra reserves. Karin replied with a sigh. We are in no place to be traveling as of yet. He might not be your teammate, but Naruto is mine. If you intend on fighting those guys, you'll need both of our help. What makes you think that? Kuretsuchi asked, slightly peeved by what Karin was implying, or at least what she thought she was implying. Naruto-kun and I have the ability to sense where our enemies are. Karin replied, I am also a great healer, as seen with what I did with Naruto. So, Kuretsuchi growled, knowing that she had lost. So we wait for Naruto to wake up, or you three can get killed. Naruto was fast asleep and snoring slightly, but Karin was starting to worry about the bones still lodged into his aorta. While her blood could heal any and all wounds, she wasn't able to force bones back into their place, but rather, only form new ones to replace those that were lost. So as of now, she was completely confused and had no idea what to do to help Naruto get better. At least it punctured. Karin sighed. If it sliced, Naruto would have bled too quickly and I probably wouldn't have been able to save him. But if it did just slice, the bone could have been easily removed from his heart cavity instead of being a permanent part of his heart. Shit. Why did he have to be such a problem half the time? Karin, have you tried just doing the surgery right now? Kuretsuchi asked. We're already almost at midday and we're still here in this cave. I have, but I don't know how to make Naruto stay stable for the time being while I do the operation on his heart. Karin replied, I'd gladly do it if you had some ninjutsu or something to stop a person's heart for a short time. I see. Kuretsuchi sighed and leaned against the rock walls. So, Karin replied after a long and awkward pause. What's an Akatsuki doing with the hero of the leaf? Kuretsuchi asked without cracking. It seems kinda ironic if you ask me. So you really were at the cage summit? Karin growled. Your cage tried to turn me into dust. I guess I'll have to say great job to my Gigi-san, Kuretsuchi replied. I could kill you and say the Akatsuki girl tried to kill me and no one would complain, but you're a necessity for Naruto here, to live. And believe me, he's more important than you are. What is your true goal here? Karin narrowed her eyes. In this cave, I have total control of my chakra since the seals weren't drawn here. So, tell me, why are you really here? Akatsuki and Hiro told me your mission, but I want to hear it from you. I guess you people don't like surprises Kuretsuchi sighed. Hokage-sama wanted to have Naruto here promoted to Junin. Especially after his heroics in successfully fighting off the Akatsuki invasion. So, my job, since I too was getting promoted to a Junin, was to be a thorn in Naruto's side and test him to the highest point and evaluate him on his performance. And, Karin asked, shit, she isn't lying. And, Naruto has exceeded my expectations. Kuro replied with a smirk. You on the other hand, we'll see in the final round. If we make it, alright, Karin growled. Besides, where the hell are Akatsuki and Hiro? Who knows? They're probably going off looking for some wood or something flammable. Kuretsuchi replied. We still don't know how the hell Naruto made a fire using rocks. Right. Karin sighed. She let out a silent groan when she realized that there was probably going to be nothing they could do for the time being. But then she received a thought. Hey, you were assigned to do this, right? So you were probably tasked with keeping them up to date, right? Yeah, but I already turned in a report yesterday. Kuretsuchi replied. That was the only one I was required to send. Shit. Karin mumbled. So they're not expecting another one, are they? Nope. Kuretsuchi shook her head. Well, I guess we'll have to think of another solution. Wait. What is it, Kuretsuchi-san? Karin asked. There is something that we do in Iowa should things like this happen. Kuretsuchi said. It might not be appropriate. How so? Karin asked, giving Kuretsuchi a weird look. I don't think it would be too weird. It's called the rock heart. The Iowa no Kokura. Kuretsuchi said. It causes the heart to freeze in its tracks and stops all blood flow without killing the victim. Now how does that work? Karin asked, sounding offended by what the girl was saying. I've gone through thousands, hell, tens of thousands of medical ninjutsu, and it's a ninjutsu used to assassinate someone. Kuretsuchi spoke with a near-dead tone. Assassinate? Karin roared. Who the hell do you think you are? I'm the one that came up with the only viable solution for the time being. Kuretsuchi replied with a glare. Oh, I bet you just want to leave the bone in his heart for the entire time until help arrives, huh? No, Karin said quietly. Exactly what I thought, Kuretsuchi replied. So, here's what's going to happen. When I turn that heart into stone, you pull that bone right out, alright? Kuretsuchi replied. It'll be a little hard to do, but you can do it. So, how does that technique work? Karin asked. Everything that is part of the aorta and the vena cava, and the heart itself, will be turned to stone, along with whatever is in it. Kuretsuchi explained. It's also a bit dangerous if there is too much stress done to the victim or stress placed onto the caster. So how do we go about not putting stress on either of you? Karin asked. You, and if or when the others return, leave. Kuretsuchi replied. What the? Karin screamed once more. I am not leaving him with you. Well, you will have to if you want his heart to heal up. Kuretsuchi replied with a glare. I need to, how do I say this, perform CPR. CPR? Karin asked with confusion. How the hell does that fix his heart? I won't be pushing onto his chest, but instead, I'll be pushing earth chakra down his trachea towards his lungs. Kuretsuchi said. The chakra will then be placed onto his blood and then moved down towards his heart because of the arteries in the lungs. From there, the earth chakra will depart from the oxygen and into the heart's flesh. It'll take about 10 to 20 seconds to fully change his heart into. You're just trying to kiss him. Karin grabbed Kuretsuchi by the collar of her shirt. He's mine. I know that. Kuretsuchi punched Karin back into a wall. Karin glared as she pushed herself from the cave walls and channeled her chakra to heal the damage done to her spine. The redhead ran a hand through her hair and fixed her glasses. She stared at Kuretsuchi with an expression that spelled death. This time I won't be as stupid as to charge in blindly like I did with Danzo. Karin had never felt more embarrassed than that moment. Never again will that happen. Karin jumped forward with her Kekkei Genkai shooting off. Kuretsuchi was getting her chakra ready for a high-leveled ninjutsu. The redhead jumped over to the right and dodged the incoming quicklime blob just in time. She sped through a few hand seals and shot forward a basic fireball technique, not enough for Kuretsuchi to feel afraid or anything, but it was enough to break the Iwa Kunoichi from her stance. Kuretsuchi jumped over and barrel rolled on the dirt and hurled a large handful of shuriken towards the redhead. Karin smirked and blocked each projectile with perfection. Karin wanted to laugh at her luck. Kuretsuchi was using chakra in every attack she launched out at her. This was going to be a walk in the park. Karin charged for Kuretsuchi's right flank, while sending a shadow clone towards the left. Kuro though simply laughed at the strategy and headed for the left Karin and popped the shadow clone in less than a few seconds. Karin, the real one, did a jump flip and hurled off a great amount of kunai and shuriken, catching Kuretsuchi in a trap. Kuro looked to her right and picked up a kunai from the ground and started deflecting them with a speed that could rival Sasuke's. Kuretsuchi spun the kunai in her hand and hurled the knife towards Karin as she recuperated from the attacks. Karin bent back using her flexibility to her advantage. The knife sped right past her head. She shot right up and grabbed onto the kunai and spun it around her finger before turning back to face Kuretsuchi. I don't think you'd want to do that, Karin. Kuretsuchi growled. My kunai will plunge through his heart, ending the work that you put through to heal him. You wouldn't. Karin gasped. Why do want to help him so badly? I was told to keep him alive. That bone in his heart, from what you told me, will probably kill him later on. Kuretsuchi replied. I'd rather not have the hero of Konoha's death be on my head. My father and grandfather would be pissed off beyond relief, and my chances of becoming Tsuchikage go out the window. So please, do us both a favor and leave for the time being so I can fix this poor boy. Karin gripped the kunai tighter than before. Let me reiterate. I am trying to help him. Kuretsuchi shouted. How about this? I'll call you over when his heart is stone. From there, do your magic. I won't do anything until the bone is completely removed from his heart, alright? Understood. Karin sighed and backed away from the two shinobi and walked off towards the exit of the cave and shook her head. Oh, meanwhile, Akatsuchi and Hiro were walking through the rocky caverns and found something that really interested them. Hiro shot forward and knocked on the wood that had strange kanji written all over rocks in front of them. He quickly motioned for Akatsuchi to follow and examine the rocks with him. It was strange since they couldn't recognize the rock's kanji. It was definitely kanji for fuinjutsu, but they couldn't tell what it was for since the kanji seemed ancient. I wonder what would happen if we put chakra into it. Hiro laughed. Don't do anything stupid, Hiro. Akatsuchi said in a worried whisper. I think that we should leave that rock alone. But what if there's something in there that could possibly help us out with this stupid test? Hiro said. I highly doubt that there will be anything, Hiro. Don't. The boy didn't listen and channeled chakra into his hands and placed them against the stone face. The kanji grew bright, with light shooting off in all directions. The rock, after a good 5 minutes, moved to the side and came to reveal a large and dark tunnel that led to somewhere deep within the cavern. Hiro looked over towards his teammate with a small smirk on his face right before taking off into the tunnel. Akatsuchi took a moment to weigh his options, but found that going after Hiro was the only one that made sense. The burly shinobi bumbled through the darkness in search for his friend. The fat man didn't know any better and started shouting out for Hiro, hoping that he might be able to get a reply. But suddenly, from the darkness, a man reached out and grabbed the boy from behind, and wrapped his hands around his neck. Akatsuchi struggled in the deathly vice-like grip. The hands were calloused and strong, almost as if the being weren't even human. Akatsuchi was running out of air and tried to cry out for Hiro once more, but the boy couldn't even breathe. He gasped out as the last bit of air left his lungs. The moment Akatsuchi stopped fighting back, the man dropped him onto the dark and dry ground below. Without another word said, the man started walking nonchalantly, stepping over the dead Chunin and whistled a small tune. But Akatsuchi's body turned hard, and soon enough, brown and cracked. The man swiveled on the heel of his sandals and stared in disbelief that the boy wasn't dead. Akatsuchi's body crumbled loudly, echoing throughout the tunnel, and within 10 seconds, collapsing completely into a pile of rock and dirt. The man walked up to the rocks and ran a hand through the dirt, surprised that it was laced completely with chakra. Without a second pass though, a fist shot from the rocks and lodged into his cheek, sending him through the wall and into one of the caves nearby. The man shot through the rocks and into another cave 3 tunnels down. Akatsuchi stopped himself as he exited from the rocks and looked down the tunnel wondering if he should follow after his idiotic teammate, but shook it off and charged for the man who just tried to kill him. It was a long way to go since the tunnels could wind through the rocks for unbelievable lengths, and even go in circles after making you think you've been going straight. There was also the risk of genjutsu being cast. So, just as a precaution, Akatsuchi sent a large burst of chakra, sending his chakra outwards, but found that there was no genjutsu placed. I guess I'll have to chase after him. Akatsuchi sighed and grabbed a chocolate bar and shoved it into his mouth before charging through the tunnel. With Kuretsuchi, she looked at Naruto's sleeping form and took a deep breath knowing full well how awkward it would be if he woke up. Might as well do it now, she thought. She took a deep breath and stared at Naruto's lips and how clean and soft they looked. After all, he hasn't had water for an entire day. She looked back over his face and found that he looked so cute asleep. Shaking the thoughts from her head, she leaned down and softly, but still with enough force, and started channeling chakra down his throat. She held her lips against his for a few minutes, but she started to get a strange feeling in her gut. Her face lit up as blood rushed to her cheeks. Kuretsuchi didn't know what to do. After all, this was her first kiss, or at least first time pressing her lips against another person's. The corner of her lips threatened to curl up as she deepened the kiss to send more chakra. Even though she knew that the kiss meant nothing, she couldn't help to think against those thoughts. Her heart tightened and her heartbeat rose as the seconds passed. She shut her eyes and held Naruto softly, and carefully, almost the way a lover would. What she didn't know, Karin was leaning against the rocks and staring at the actions take place. While deep down she knew that it was to save Naruto, Karin could help but to feel her heart tighten. Her eyebrows furrowed as her anger and jealousy started to fester and grow. Karin clenched her fists and tried her hardest to control her growing and dangerously erratic breathing. She shook her head and her crimson eyes trailed away towards the sky above them. It was the second day of the second stage of the exam. She and Naruto needed to hurry if they wanted any chance of making to the second checkpoint in time, hell even the third. It wasn't going to be easy to make it to the next 3 checkpoints with the only teammate she had incapacitated. Karin wasn't a strong girl, nor was she weak, but she knew that she'd wear herself out if she chose to run through the desert with Naruto on her back. Kuretsuchi paid no attention to the obvious flares in chakra and emotions coming from Karin. In truth, Kuretsuchi was in bliss, complete and utter bliss. Never before had her heart raced to such speeds, and it was all just from a kiss. It wasn't even a serious kiss. She wondered what would happen if she kissed someone she truly felt something for, something on the level of love. She pressed deeper, but then her mind started going on autopilot as her nerves went blank. She built up chakra at the tip of her tongue and her tongue went into Naruto's mouth, awaking the boy from his sleep. Kuretsuchi, with her eyes still closed, didn't even realize that he'd awakened from his rest and continued pressing chakra into his mouth. He too went into autopilot without even making a word and started kissing back, much to both of their surprise. Kuretsuchi pulled back and stared at Naruto with wide eyes. Her cheeks were on fire and her body was suddenly cold and pouring sweat. She raised her fist and with a quick motion, knocked the boy back out so she could continue the operation. Kuretsuchi shook her head, knowing all too well that she was getting emotionally compromised and almost completely forgot the true reason she was even pressing her lips against his in the first place. With Naruto out once more, she bent down and went back to kissing him, but tried her hardest to not make out with him again. She started the chakra flow once more and again the heartbeat rose again. Kuro looked up to see Karin looking at her and Naruto with a glare. Turns out, Karin sensed the sudden burst of emotion from Naruto and went to see what had happened. Karin was debating whether to knock Kuretsuchi out for hurting Naruto or letting the Iwa Kunoichi continue what she was doing. "Gee, good thing that you're here," Kuretsuchi responded quite sheepishly. "His heart is ready. All right, I know this might sound ridiculous, but you might just have to kiss him again," Karin said with a grunt. "His heart may be stone, but you'll need to keep channeling chakra into his body to keep him sedated from the pain I'm about to cause him." "Understood," Kuretsuchi said with a small unnoticeable smile. She quickly bent down and started kissing Naruto once more, shoving chakra into his body. Karin shook her head and reached up to her glasses and pulled out a scalpel from the arms of the glasses. She opened Naruto's shirt underneath his jumpsuit and cut open the skin, revealing bone and lots of flesh. But upon closer inspection, the heart was indeed made of stone. Karin looked to Kuretsuchi to see that the Iwa girl wasn't even paying attention and was too engrossed with Naruto's lips. Karin shook her head and channeled chakra to her hands, creating a chakra cover over her palms and fingers almost like a blade, and cut cleanly through the ribs and opened the chest cavity where the heart and lungs were located. Karin looked and found the final rib still embedded in the stone aorta. It stuck out like a sore thumb. Karin grabbed the bone and pulled softly, but found that the bone was stuck. She grunted with another pull. The bone was still stuck but managed to shift out of position. She wrapped both hands around the rib and pulled with all of her might and managed to tear the bone from the aorta, sending her back a few feet because of how much power she put into her pull. She stood up and patted herself down and walked up to Naruto only to fall down to her knees. Kuretsuchi shot up from Naruto and looked to Karin with eyes as wide as plates, almost as if the girl was saying, "What have you done?" Naruto's rock aorta and heart crumbled almost completely halfway. With rock dust and other contaminants going onto the rest of his body, Naruto started convulsing and twitching. Karin was frozen completely. Never has something like this happened. She looked to Kuratsuchi and glared while channeling chakra once more. Kuratsuchi pushed Karin away and sped through an unknown hand seal pattern and placed her hands onto Naruto's chest but didn't say a single word. The boy suddenly stopped moving. Naruto was still and laid on the ground in silence. The rocks and the pebbles started reforming and combining together once more. Kuro figured that Karin might do the arm-biting ability again, but knew that it wouldn't fix the heart of stone technique. Kuratsuchi, after completely reforming Naruto's heart and aorta, she kept her hand on his heart and went over to kiss Naruto once more, this time channeling chakra into his body both through the mouth and through physical touch. Karin sat down and stared in awe of what Kuratsuchi was doing. As she forced chakra into Naruto's body, strengthening and freezing the heart into stone, she was also taking away the chakra and turning the organ back into flesh, almost like a mold. Within a few minutes, Naruto's heart was back to normal and free of damage. Karin was dumbfounded. Kuratsuchi gave her a look and grabbed her arm and shut Naruto's skin closed and sunk Naruto's teeth into Karin's arm. Karin screamed out in pleasure, it seemed, and soon enough, Naruto's body began to heal and seal shut. Karin could sense Naruto's body returning to normal and his heartbeat softening. Karin herself was trying to calm her racing heart. Karin-chan, Kuro-chan. Naruto looked confused and stared off at the two girls sitting next to him. They looked disheveled and completely in fear, or at least, recovering from a lot of it. He tilted his head slightly and gave the two of them a small smile before lying back down onto the ground and falling back asleep. He was suddenly forced back awake by Kuratsuchi and Karin shouting at him. Naruto raised an eyebrow with an obvious scowl on his face and was pulled to his feet by both Karin and Kuratsuchi. Why do I have to move so much? Naruto asked with a growl. Why are you two shouting at me? Because Naruto-kun, we only have one more day left for the exam. This day is already coming to midday and we still have 75 miles left to go Baka. Karin shouted. We also have to find Akatsuchi and Hiro since they haven't returned from their search for food. Why are you shouting, Karin-chan? Naruto gave her a dull look. Wait. Don't worry. Let me meditate for a while. The boy shot down and got into a meditative stance and shut his eyes, channeling nature chakra and building up his reserves for sage mode. The Kyuubi was stirring within him, as was Kushina. The two of them were wondering what was happening as well, since the two have been gone for quite some time. Kurama narrowed his eyes through Naruto and started sensing a great deal of shinobi making their way through the cavern's walls and through both natural and man-made tunnels. Naruto shot his eyes open to reveal the eyes of the demon sage mode. Naruto's whiskers darkened and his eyes turned into a deeper and bloodier red color. He shot forward, launching Karin and Kuratsuchi back, and lodged his fist into the wall of the cavern behind them, shattering the cave completely. The resulting explosion shot all of the chakra signatures back into the tunnels and caves within the wall. Naruto shut his eyes once more and channeled a great deal of yokai before shooting it out in all directions, frying the fuinjutsu all over the caver walls. You two go on and deliver the scrolls to the next checkpoint. I'll get Akatsuchi and Hiro out of the caves and meet you two there. And with that, Naruto dashed into the hole. Screams echoed through the dark tunnels and the sound of slashed flesh and cracking bones reverberated within the cave the two girls were standing in. It didn't take long, but the two girls disobeyed Naruto and dashed into the hole after him, knowing full well that Naruto might do something that would endanger all of them or even more. He was annoyingly known for doing such things, it seems. Karin shut her eyes and sent out another chakra burst, trying to sense where Naruto was. After all, he was the brightest and the most peaceful chakra source there was. Despite being washed down in complete darkness by the Kyuubi's chakra, Naruto's power was exceeding what it normally was in sage mode, and was starting to drown out all other chakra signatures, slightly causing Karin to worry. Right. Karin motioned for Kuratsuchi to follow. The two girls dashed down a large hallway that was almost perfectly rectangular with angles and a perfect ceiling. Karin was worried for Naruto at first, but now she was completely terrified. The walls were almost too perfect, reminding her of the bases that Orochimaru made all over the elemental nations. The patterns on the walls really gave the impression. This wasn't something she was hoping to encounter. It was either some Oto shinobi that were left after the dissolution of Otogakure, or they were joining together under another upstart. The most likely was that Kabuto was trying to build an army again, but in the name of Orochimaru most likely. Karin smacked her lips and continued the chakra flow, following after the massive darkness that was plowing through the tunnels and structure. Left. Karin jumped in front of Kuratsuchi and took off down another tunnel that within a few yards of running, brought the two of them to a intersection of the tunnels. There were two ways to go, left or right, but at this point, they were so close to Naruto, Karin couldn't tell which way he was since his chakra was just so great. Not only that, but while there were lights on the walls themselves along with the floor, was covered in corpses, mauled and ripped to shreds. It was terrifying to Karin since never in her entire life, even under the servitude of Orochimaru, had she seen such carnage. The redhead ran a hand through the unkempt side of her hair and made a quick choice and chose to go down through the right side, following the most blood and the trails that led to other directions, possibly another tunnel that could lead to Akatsuchi and Hiro. Karin took a deep breath when the tunnel they came up to had its door bashed down and the walls surrounding the doorframe ruined and splintered completely. She pushed the door down and sighed in relief when she found Naruto cutting Akatsuchi and Hiro free from the ropes and chains that bound them against some pillars. Naruto created two shadow clones that picked the two boys up and carried them on their backs. Good thing that you two don't listen to orders, or else I would have been worried. Naruto replied with a smirk. So you knew we'd follow after you? Kuratsuchi gave him an incredulous look. How? Naruto smirked at his luck. He found an oasis in the middle of the desert between the second checkpoint and the third. So far, this was the only form of water he'd been able to find since turning in his and Kuratsuchi's scrolls. He and Kuro were in a hurry, so they didn't take the checkpoint as a pit stop, and right after turning in their scrolls, took off into the desert. But now, they were finally somewhat getting back on schedule since they managed to get at least halfway to the third checkpoint. Naruto, though, was parched and was leaning on his knees, gasping for air and drowning in his own sweat. He let out a small sigh and led the rest of the two teams towards the oasis, and the blonde took a dive into the water. His body quickly cooled to the water. A sigh escaped his lips, a sigh of content. He swam around and motioned for everyone else to join in. Kuro and Karin were completely against the idea since they were running low on time, but the boys didn't listen to them and jumped into the water as well, splashing the liquid in all directions. Kuratsuchi grumbled in defeat and leaned against a date tree with her body underneath the shade of the leaves rustling in the desert winds. Karin shook her head and sat next to Kuratsuchi, basking in the cool that the shade provides. Naruto saw this and was quickly annoyed that Karin and Kuratsuchi seemed better under shade than in the water, and chose to splash some of the water towards the two girls. The two were quickly soaked, pissing them off indefinitely. Kuratsuchi charged forward with fire in her eyes, ready to kill the Uzumaki. Karin, though, had some water enter her mouth and she involuntarily swallowed, tasting something that made her hurl over onto the sand and desert shrubs nearby. Her crimson eyes looked around and quickly realized that they were actually under a powerful genjutsu placed by some pretty good teams. She could sense at least 6 different chakra signatures that she didn't recognize, but their chakras were concealed and hidden, at least from the eye. She narrowed her eyes towards the largest chakra signature behind the group and started memorizing his chakra signature. On his back was a katana that was obviously made from chakra-conductive metal. The taste suddenly registered in her mind, the metallic aftertaste, the gross response to the flavor. It all made sense. Her eyes widened when a chakra spike was sensed. She threw her hands together and channeled as much chakra as she could, and managed to dispel the genjutsu for everyone. Naruto was quickly released from Kuratsuchi's death grip. The two teams gasped in surprise at what they saw. There were scorched bodies and blackened sand, along with the oasis of clean and wonderful water really being a pool of diluted blood filled with body parts. Karin jumped up and pulled out a kunai. Naruto and the others jumped from the pool and quickly wiped themselves free from the bloodied water. From the shrubs came 6 shinobi, it seemed, especially since their chakra signatures spoke volumes. The thing was, they weren't wearing any hitai to signify whether or not they were aligned with any of the great nations or even with the Land of Iron. If anything, these men seemed to have been a part of the group that attacked Naruto and his team not too long ago. It was at that moment that Naruto facepalmed harder than ever before. His skin was cold and his body shivered from embarrassment and let out a pained sigh. Anime tears trickled down his cheeks as he looked to both Kuretsuchi and Karin with a distraught look. The two girls gave him a strange look before placing a hand on his shoulders, but Naruto quickly shrugged them off. I knew I was forgetting to do something back at the checkpoint. Naruto whined. I didn't tell the Junin in command to look for these guys. Kuretsuchi and Karin froze in their tracks, their faces completely still. The attackers lowered their defenses and stared at the two teams in front of them. Karin was the first to react and rammed her fist into the back of Naruto's head, making him plant face first with the sand below. Kuretsuchi was about to join in, but Karin held the Iwa Kunoichi back and mouthed that she'd handle it. You ing baka. Karin grabbed the blonde by the collar of his jacket. Who knows how many are after us? Naruto was shaken viciously by Karin's superhuman strength. Her grip was starting to slowly dig and tear at the blonde's jacket and jumpsuit jacket. She continued trying to shake an answer from him, but he was just too shell-shocked. Karin, after feeling bored with shaking the Uzumaki back and forth, released him from her grip and nonchalantly dropped his limp body onto the sand below. She turned to face the attackers only to see Kuretsuchi and her team beating them into the ground with their feet quick-limed in place. The 3 Iwa shinobi used the 6 men as spring-loaded punching bags. They continued pounding into the men until they could no longer bend and bounce back. Kuretsuchi was about to take a kunai and end their lives, but quickly realized that these men could be used as prisoners to interrogate. Naruto and Karin broke from their actions and stared as Kuretsuchi and Akatsuchi took out a large scroll and quickly unraveled the object, revealing a large empty seal that was surrounded by an intricate array of other seals. Naruto was completely surprised by the sight since he'd almost never seen something like that. While the Kuchios shot out seals in different directions, they looked nothing like the ones that he was looking at right now. These were more intricate, almost as if they were made to hold things in while keeping them fresh, almost like a refrigerator but for more important things, he surmised. Kuretsuchi broke the man from the binds wrapped around his feet and laid him out onto the scroll and sped through a few hand seals while Hiro started doing the same. Within a few seconds, they slammed their hands into the shinobi's chest and the seals shot out from beneath their palms, wrapping around the shinobi. After a quick, split second, the man disappeared within a large blast of smoke. Once the smoke dispersed, it came to reveal a large kanji character that said, Seal. Akatsuchi rolled up the scroll and wrapped the object around his back and tightened the strap. Kuretsuchi looked back to Naruto and Karin and motioned for the two of them to follow. The two Uzumaki broke from their trance and followed with a quick pace, not wanting to fall behind. They had 2 more checkpoints to go and barely 12 more hours remaining for the second stage of the Chunin exams. Naruto was feeling a bit confused, especially since this Chunin exam was probably 1,000 times harder than the first one he took. Kuretsuchi shouted out to the entire group and raised her fist and channeled a powerful blast of chakra and ended up dispelling the genjutsu in place of the area they were stuck in. The horizon shimmered and distorted to reveal a building filled and surrounded by Suna shinobi. Kuretsuchi took the number 3 scrolls and headed into the building to make sure that the entire shinobi alliance knows what they encountered in the desert. Naruto and the rest of the teams were led into the checkpoint and given water bottles and food for a quick rest and rejuvenation. Karin leaned her head on Naruto's shoulder and took a bite from her energy bar while Naruto took a massive swig of water from his bottle. The two stayed quiet and didn't say a word while Kuretsuchi spoke to the Junin in command. It took a while longer than what was originally thought, but after nearly 20 minutes, Kuratsuchi returned with another scroll in her hand and motioned for the four shinobi still waiting to follow. They took off into the desert with the sun still up in the sky, but quickly descending. This wasn't good for them, especially since they were already starting to fall behind. Karin ran up to Naruto and nodded before jumping onto his back just like she did at the start of the second stage of the exam. She shut her eyes and started channeling chakra again, while giving a second-by-second update of teams nearby or far. As it was, there were probably 20 to 30 teams still making their way towards the third and fourth checkpoints while there were about 6 that were already made it to the end. It was quite embarrassing to Naruto since he had lost to a bunch of genin that were probably a year or younger than him. Kuratsuchi quickly turned and reminded him that she wasn't the only applicant that was secretly already Chunin rank gearing for a higher rank. Why would they pit them against a bunch of genin though? Naruto asked out in complete anger, nearly breaking Karin from her trance. Genin have no place in war, as deemed by all 5 cages. Kuratsuchi sighed. All 5 of them voted to have the genin see a first taste of war. What? Naruto was astonished. Tsunade Ba-chan wouldn't do that. Actually, it was the Hokage that put it up for voting. Kuratsuchi replied. Oh, how could I forget? Naruto's eyes trailed down towards the sand as they continued to run. Nawaki, Tsunade Ba-chan's little brother, wasn't he only a genin when he died in the last war? Wait a minute, he was doing this exact role in the last war that got him killed. If she's willing to make genin go through this, then this war won't be a joke. Not that wars are jokes, but this will most likely have a lot of casualties that can't be avoided. This isn't good at all. What if we can't defeat the Akatsuki? What if I fail to master the Kyuubi's chakra? Damn it, why is everything so complicated now? I've made a promise to myself, though never spoken, to make sure to make as many people survive as possible, but if the war is going to be this dangerous, I don't know if I'll be able to keep that promise. Naruto shook his head of those thoughts and charged forward up to Kuratsuchi's side with Karin still shouting off directions of teams and their chakra levels. Kuratsuchi was shouting commands to Akatsuchi and Hiro telling them to take the flanks and protect Naruto and Karin from attack. The blonde looked around and saw absolutely nothing, while these Chunin and Karin could apparently see everything else. Naruto sighed in despair when he realized that his skills weren't as great as he had originally thought. He continued to run and suddenly realized that he had Sage Mode in his control. A bright smile spread across his face and he started channeling as much nature chakra as he could as he ran. It was tough and sweat started pouring from his body as they went. Slowly, but surely, the chakra flowed in from the cacti and sand below. It came from the wind and from the sun above, strengthening his bones and skin. His body loosened and quickly grew rigid like rock. His bones hardened and his chakra capacity skyrocketed. Karin was broken from her trance and she looked down at Naruto with wide eyes for a moment. All of a sudden, Naruto's normally peaceful chakra exploded outwards, covering her senses with something akin to a forest teeming with wildlife. She felt the gusts of cool, moist wind hitting her face and the nice cool warmth of a peaceful forest fill her heart. Through this though, she felt her chakra coils loosen and her tenketsu loosen as well, allowing the smoother flow of chakra. Her range increased and the quality of her sensing was especially better than what it was before. She smirked as her chakra flowed out in waves. Soon enough, she was sensing the body types and the sizes of each and every person within the 50-mile radius that she could sense. There were 8 teams that were in the immediate vicinity with members that had Chunin to Junin leveled chakra reserves. Karin gasped at the chakra capacity of these guys, and quickly surmised that they were Chunin that were placed into the exam in secret. But upon closer inspection, she channeled her chakra on a few specific members, mainly Kumo and Iwa, and found that those kids were actually genin. This made her heart beat heavily and she quickly found that these guys were no joke. Their chakra made her scared and the fact that they weren't even Jinchuriki but had the chakra capacity of 1, made her slightly more terrified. That was something that almost never happens more than once in a generation. Karin was about to say something, but Kuratsuchi nodded her head at the redhead, signifying that she already knew who they were. Over the dunes, a large cloud of sand exploded outwards and above the horizon. Soon enough, the 8 teams showed up and the Iowa teams were the first to show up. They ran towards the black-haired Chunin and gave Kuratsuchi a bright smile. Kuratsuchi-sama. One of the Iowa genin smiled. We made it. I can tell Junichi. What are you doing with these Kumo teams though? Kuratsuchi asked. I could have sworn that you were supposed to take scrolls from those guys as well. We had all the same scrolls with duplicates to spare. Junichi replied with a smirk. I see. Kuratsuchi nodded her head and turned back to the rest of the genin and the other 2 chunin. Well then guys, I guess that we should get going. Naruto took a deep breath and had his eyes wide with fright. Because of his senjutsu, he was able to sense the power that these genin held within them. They weren't even Jinchuriki and yet their chakra was on his and Sasuke's levels. That was something that was a bit of a terrifying thing to prospect. His senjutsu was almost blocked out by the rest of these massive chakra signatures. Karin was faring no better. Her red eyes trailed left and right, staring in awe at the 12 and 13-year-olds standing in front of them. They all were probably only 5 feet as well, so it was even more of a confusing thing to think about. After all, they were just children. At least in her eyes, they were children. Karin shook her head and took a deep breath while sending out yet another blast of sensory chakra and nearly fainted. Guys! Karin shouted. There's a large group of high chakra shinobi moving in this direction. They aren't friendly. What are those guys doing so close to the final checkpoint? Naruto shouted out. Where are the cage's reinforcements? They said that it might take a while before they can mobilize Naruto. Kuratsuchi sighed. We will have to defend ourselves for a while, I guess. You guess. You guess. Naruto sighed in exasperation as Karin dropped off of his back and dropped into a fighting stance. This was definitely not a good idea. How about this, Baka? We have to defend ourselves. Karin growled. I doubt we'll be able to make it out of here without getting a few unnecessary casualties. We'd have even more if we stay and fight. Naruto replied. I'm with Naruto on this, Akatsuchi and Hiro said at the same time, while both sounded a bit unsure of themselves. I don't think we'd be able to fight off that many, even with the amount of shinobi we have. How many signatures did you sense, Karin? The amount of a small army, almost 80 people. Karin gasped. I keep sensing more and more, but that is just from my preliminary scan of the area. It doesn't matter. If there are that many shinobi, we still need to fight back to make sure that they don't attack Suna in the process of the Chunin exams. But, no buts, Naruto-kun, we need to stand and fight. Karin replied. I am against fighting as much as you are, maybe even more so, but please, we have to now. Whoever these guys are, they aren't playing around. We don't even know their true intentions for the rest of the exams. We don't even know who their allegiance is with. I didn't know Konoha shinobi could grow some backbone. One of the Kumo genins laughed. Karin blushed at the compliment and ran a quick hand through her red hair and looked back up toward the dunes and shut her eyes, getting a good look at the shinobi and their numbers and chakra type. With the amount of time she'd spent in Konoha, and their diverse shinobi skills and elements, she was able to diversify and single out certain chakra affinities and assign colors to each affinity, making sensing a whole lot easier. She glared back and forth as the elements for fire and earth were what she was able to sense back. She looked back to her comrades and temporary comrades and nodded her head. At least 80% use fire and the rest are earth users. No special elemental Kekkei Genkei that I can discern at the moment. Karin quickly said. Naruto, are you ready for a fight now? I have no choice in the matter, so I guess I am. Naruto sighed as more senjutsu chakra filled his body, strengthening him beyond belief. I don't intend to lose right now, especially since we're so damn close. 2 clones popped up next to the Uzumaki and they raised their hands, channeling chakra into the air around the blonde. Naruto raised his right arm, forming a Rasengan with wind pouring off of its sides. The wind sharpened into blades, and soon enough, the Rasengan had formed into a large spiraling shuriken made of pure wind. The Jinchuriki smirked and hurled the attack forward while charging ahead with the two clones following close behind. The Rasenshuriken collided with a large group to the west of the shinobi in the middle, shooting up a massive cloud of sand and dirt, covering their vision for a while. But once the sand was whisked away, all they could see was Naruto beating down 20 men on his own, with nothing but his bare fists and his clones aiding him. Karin smirked softly at the sight. Naruto weaved back and forth, dodging each attack and kick aimed directly at him. But thanks to Karin's training and her teaching him how to anticipate attacks, Naruto was virtually untouched, along with Senjutsu helping him out a bit. One of the enemy shinobi shot forward with a knife and was ready to dig the blade into the blonde's back, but Naruto swiveled around at the last second and dug his own kunai into the man's side while one of his clones dashed in and rammed a Rasengan barrage into two other shinobi, sending them careening into the sand. As this happened, the real Naruto stood in utter shock at what he'd just done. He'd just killed a man in less than a second. This was actually the first man he'd ever killed, well, at least the first he'd ever seen bleed by his own hand. Naruto was frozen as the blood began to flow down the side of the shinobi's puncture wound. The shinobi stared into the deep blues of Naruto's eyes, and within a few seconds, the pupils dilated completely, signifying the end of someone's life. Something that Naruto had never anticipated seeing. Well, at least for the time being. It didn't take long, but Naruto dropped the dead shinobi onto the ground and took a deep breath in fear as he'd finally realized that he'd ended a man. The ramifications sent explosive shivers up and down his spine and resting in the bottom of his gut, causing him to nearly hurl onto the sand below. His legs gave out and he collapsed onto the dirt with his breath heavy and labored. He knew that he'd have to kill someone, but he expected it to be Sasuke, should the Uchiha not turn from his ways, not some fodder ninja that didn't even give the blonde the satisfaction of a name. Naruto stared at the dead man, and quickly realized that the other two that his senjutsu-enhanced clone disposed of, weren't getting up. His eyes widened when he found that the Rasengan were actually killing their enemies. They were not only rendering them unconscious or even immobile or unable to mold chakra normally, but instead, they were actually taking the lives of other shinobi, other people. Naruto brought a hand to his chest and gripped his racing heart through his jacket and started to hyperventilate as the breaths took speed. His breath was fast and short, and his body started to shiver from his realization. He never meant to kill most of those people, probably just 2 out of how many people he'd shoved a Rasengan into. He looked down at his hands and found blood from the dead shinobi in front of him, drenching his hands and clothes. He freaked out and started backing away from the dead man, but ended up rolling down the side of the dune and landing at Karin's feet. The redhead was already waiting for him and placed a healing hand onto the blonde's chest, and the effects were immediate. The blonde started breathing softer and breathing slower. His glazed eyes were regaining color as his heartbeat slowed to a manageable rate. Naruto reached up and placed a hand against Karin's cheek and whispered something incoherent, right before passing out. Karin's eyes were wide and she quickly sent another blast of healing chakra into the blonde's body, trying to wake him from his sleep, but found that it was probably useless. Knowing how Naruto was, he'd be out for quite a while, maybe another hour or even 2 at the most. She looked back towards the top of the dunes and clenched her fists and glared back to the other side of the dunes and found some of the Iwa and Kumo teams fighting off the bandits or whoever they are, and sensed that many of the genin were starting to run low on chakra, despite having such high capacities. Karin, though, wasn't worried about the dunes and protecting the group. Instead, she was more worried about Naruto's mental state. For just a few minutes, went haywire, and Karin was quickly on alert, completely wary of what might happen this time, should something happen at all. Her heart tightened when she felt his genuine sorrow. She kept her hand on the blonde's chest and let out a silent whisper before sending another attack of medical ninjutsu. Suddenly, smoke shot off into the air, and explosions shook the area, and the bandits were forced back by Suna, Iwa, Kiri, Konoha and Kumo shinobi led by Gaara, the Cage. The bandits took off towards Kami knows where, leaving Naruto and the rest of the group to the devices of the Cage. Gaara dashed forward past the teams of examinees and gave Karin and Kuretsuchi knowing looks. It didn't take long for the two girls to catch on. With a quick motion, the two girls managed to redirect the attention with their teams and the others back towards getting to the final checkpoint to complete the mission. The only problem was that Naruto was on the verge of passing out, and he was too damn heavy with muscle for Karin to carry. The two teams looked back up towards the sky and found the sun was already starting to go down, signifying the near end of the second stage of the exam. Kuretsuchi and Karin tossed Naruto over to Akatsuchi and the burly Iwa Chunin caught Naruto and slung the boy over his back and the two teams took off through the dunes towards the checkpoint, or at least where they thought it was. They didn't know if it would be another genjutsu-covered checkpoint or a large building to finish off the test. It didn't matter now though. Karin was desperate to finish this exam and finally move past all of the bandits and into the final stage. But after nearly 10 minutes of silence, her crimson eyes widened as a large blob of chakra signatures showed up once more, almost as if they were fabricated from the air. Karin looked to Kuretsuchi and the girl gave one of the other teams following them another look. Kuretsuchi sped through a few hand seals and fired off a quicklime blob, encasing 5 of those bandits. Karin looked back up to the sky to see that half of the sun was already underneath the horizon. Kuretsuchi. The sun. Karin roared. We need distractions. Kuretsuchi howled out toward the genin teams following them. We need one now. From the sand dunes around them, bandits exploded outwards, showering the teams in sand and caltrops that were hidden in the large sand clouds. Karin, though, saw everything that the men were planning. A shinobi shot up from the side of the dune next to her with his sword drawn out, but Karin weaved around the attack and elbowed down, sending the man face down into the sand. She looked over to see Akatsuchi trying his hardest to fight off the desert bandits while still trying to keep Naruto completely fine and free of harm. Hiro was faring no better, but managed to defeat a few of the bandits in the process of his fight. Karin sensed a spike of chakra and turned right around and hurled a handful of shuriken towards the source faster than a blink of an eye, almost impossible in any normal situation. She blinked in surprise at her sudden, newfound skill and nearly passed out on the spot from excitement. She snapped from the thoughts almost immediately and ran over to Akatsuchi and started motioning for the Iowa team to follow closely. Kuretsuchi-sama. One of the genin hollered. We'll do our best to hold them off for the time being. Go and finish this test. Kuretsuchi was surprised and was planted on the spot, until Karin started pulling on the black-haired girl's arm, breaking her trance. The redhead grabbed Kuretsuchi quite hard and almost started dragging the Iwa Kunoichi through the sand in the last attempt to get them to the end of the exam. Karin pulled the girl a little harder, breaking Kuretsuchi from her trance. The pink-eyed girl stared in confusion but then realized that they were all running towards somewhere. What's going on? Kuretsuchi called out. We're heading towards the final checkpoint, but we have to move as fast as possible. The sun is already nearly past the horizon and we are about to fail this test. Karin quickly spoke. Gaara-sama had managed to force back a large group of the bandits, but a few still got away and are in pursuit of us. So get yourself together and run. Kuretsuchi nodded and followed after Akatsuchi as he bumbled through the sand dunes with Naruto waving on his back like a loose rag. But as the moments passed, they finally made it over one of the largest dunes in the desert so far, but once they got to the top, they saw a massive arena and a large closed building right next to the arena. That must be the final stage of the Chunin exams here. This has got to be the end of the second stage. With all of those buildings and the shinobi teams converging towards it, that must be the end. It has to be. Karin made a quick hand motion and waved the rest of the shinobi towards the front door of the final checkpoint, but now, the sun was practically gone with the final rays of light leaving the earth. Karin looked down at her watch and felt her blood run cold just like the desert land. There was only 2 more hours before the second exam was over. After all, this was the desert and the sun was out longer than in other countries. Karin looked down the slope of the sand dune and found almost all of the teams charging at each other in the last-ditch effort to get rid of the rest of the competition. They used an assortment of elemental ninjutsu along with a large assortment of weapons and taijutsu attacks. There were large bonfires made from the bodies of teams that were defeated in the last few hours of the test. The sad thing though, they weren't even 100 yards from the final checkpoint. The two teams rolled down the slope of the sand dune and landed just in time to dodge a powerful fireball technique from a Konoha team taking on an Iowa team. Just a few meters away, a Kiri team was taking on a Kumo team with water and lightning techniques. Over to the far right, 5 Kiri teams were fighting toe-to-toe with 5 Suna teams, one by one, killing each other off as explosions rang up and down the stretch of land. Karin shook her head and seemed to get a slight apocalyptic feel to the second stage's final part. The redhead shouted over the commotion and the screams and managed to keep the two teams together and steady throughout the chaos. Fire rained down from the sky above and boulders were shot from below the sandy surface. Water globs from the mouths of experienced genin hit with wind techniques from some fan-wielding Suna shinobi. Akatsuchi ducked as a powerful ball of fire shot for his head and flew right above him, hitting a poor genin form Kiri with perfect accuracy, setting the kid ablaze. Karin's crimson eyes went wide at the sight and her ears were on the verge of bleeding from the ear-splitting shrieks the poor genin let out. Karin was terrified. This was probably a good reason to add to the list of reasons to why she didn't want to be a ninja anymore. Well, not that it mattered anymore, she was going to become a chunin soon for Konoha. The group dashed forward dodging elemental attacks and flying kunai and shuriken that came from all directions. Men and women were pulled beneath the sand surface using the earth's suicide technique and others were gutted with sharp kunai, stained with the blood of the desert animals and other genin. Over from beneath dunes that surrounded the arena, a large host of scorpions and snakes plowed from the sand, showering the battlefield with sand. Genin broke from their fights and turned their attention of the natural defenders of the desert and tried their best to kill the creatures while receiving some debilitating casualties and even a few deaths amongst their ranks. Karin looked to Kuratsuchi and shook her head, knowing that they were already running low on time, and as of yet, they only had 30 minutes left to get through the rest of the battlefield and into the building. Kuratsuchi agreed, although half-heartedly, and followed after Karin who followed after Akatsuchi. The burly shinobi held Naruto tightly and made sure that nothing would happen to the blonde shinobi. It was a bit of a struggle, especially since Akatsuchi had already taken a few kunai to the knees and shoulders as he tried his best to keep Naruto protected from the projectiles. "We're almost there," Karin cried out. Suddenly, from the sand, a large stone golem shot up, spraying sand into their eyes, and forcing Naruto from Akatsuchi's back and causing the blonde to fly through the air right before landing face first onto the sand below. Once the sand cloud dispersed, it came to reveal the golem ready to smash the blonde into the dirt. Karin's eyes went wide as her heart nearly stopped. This would have been the second time within the last 24 hours that Naruto was about to die right before her. She felt something within her snap, almost as if a barrier that was used to keep her from knowing her true self had fallen. Power exploded within her in just a quick split second. Her crimson eyes darkened and she sped through a hand-seal combination with almost lightning speeds, and with perfect precision. There was a strange glint in the girl's glasses and she finished her technique with the half-ram hand-seal. Chakra exploded out from her body, causing the golem to freeze just as its fist was about to make contact with Naruto's face. The golem looked up only to be wrapped up in chakra chains and suddenly crushed by the increasing pressure of the chains. Kuratsuchi was completely surprised as were the others on her team. Their jaws were lax and hanging slightly. Akatsuchi was thinking about saying something, but deigned from it and dashed to pick Naruto up off the ground, but he was stopped when Karin grabbed the blonde boy and hoisted him over her shoulder. The glint still shining in her glasses and eyes showed that Karin was no longer planning on being useless anymore. Her heart pounded from the use of chakra like that. She felt that heat chakra reserves were already running low, but she felt that she could manage. She tightened her hold on Naruto's Haori and held him closer to her to make sure that he doesn't pass out again. She could feel his chakra and how it was withering for some strange reason. His mental state was also no good either, making Karin worried. A powerful explosion shook the ground, causing everyone to the group except for Karin. She turned to Kuratsuchi with a new light and ran a quick hand through the unkempt side of her hair and nodded softly. No words were needed between the two girls since they already know what Naruto would say, if he were awake. Karin simply turned her back to the battle and charged headstrong towards the front door, with the final and fourth scroll ready. The two teams charged into the building and the doors were subsequently locked tight, closing off everyone that was left outside in the hell that was taking place. Karin sighed in relief and collapsed onto the floor and stared aimlessly at the ceiling as other shinobi ran up to them to treat their wounds. Naruto was whisked away to the infirmary for the time being. Karin was definitely relieved and even smiled towards the blonde. Kuratsuchi fell onto her butt and let out a powerful sigh and wiped a small ball of sweat on her forehead. She smirked a bit and nodded her head at Karin before turning away and heading off towards who knows where. Karin pushed herself from the ground and headed off towards the nearest waiting room after she turned her scroll into the Junin mediator, the final checkpoint. Karin, though, suddenly froze when she felt a powerful pit in Naruto's thoughts and emotions. A powerful darkness had caused her to turn into a statue. It was nothing like the Kyuubi's power and presence, this was something else entirely. It was almost as if there was another person entirely within Naruto. It scared her. Her blood ran cold and her eyes stayed wide. Her heartbeat sped slightly as Naruto's thoughts wandered into more gruesome thoughts. This new person was still Naruto, but it was more or less like a different persona of Naruto. She struggled to get through the darkness to find the light that Naruto was best known for, the light that always saw a way to never dim or ever darken, a light that always shined no matter the situation. Karin was so confused, especially since Naruto wasn't harmed, at least as bad as she'd thought, especially after she and Kuratsuchi removed the bone from his aorta. Instead of him getting hurt, he finally saw his first kill. Karin thought quietly to herself. She'd seen a lot of death in her lifetime, as sad as it was to admit. But, never had she taken the lives of others, not even once. Well, you had to give the girl some credit. After all, she was just a lab rat that stayed with her test tubes and blood samples rather than going out into the real world to get some actual combat experience. That was for people like Naruto and Sasuke. It didn't take long, but Naruto was now back onto his feet and started shouting the normal things that Naruto would normally shout about, but there was something different about him. Karin stared at him for a good 10 minutes before realizing that Naruto was probably just being his normal self and was struggling to keep his wits about him. The redhead sighed and let out a laugh when Naruto managed to botch his own joke with one of the nurses. Naruto, though, while on the outside was completely fine, no scars or anything, he was a raging storm of emotions within. He watched the light leave a man with his own eyes. Never had he ever imagined seeing something like that. In the end, he knew that it would have been necessary sooner or later. But thinking back even further, he came to the realization that he had killed before. It wasn't Kakuzu. Kakashi told him that he had disposed of the Akatsuki, but instead it was some man in Suna when he first came back from training. The Udama Rasengan rammed into the fake Itachi. The image flashed through Naruto's mind for a quick moment and made him flinch at the cry of pain that the spy let out, the impact and the sputter that the man let out, signifying the end of his life. Naruto shook his head and adopted his mask once more and smiled softly at the shinobi and nurses looking over his vitals. Tsunade soon walked into the room and gave Naruto a good bonk on the head and ruffled his hair. The Hokage was worried after some of the reports about bandits in the desert, but felt that the only thing she should do was trust in Naruto's skills. She knew that this test was going to be brutal, but she didn't imagine it on this level. So many genin were killed in the second stage just to make a point that war shouldn't be taken lightly. It was cold-hearted and the Hokage knew it, but with a war for the sake of the world, one had to take drastic measures to protect the present to preserve the future. At least that's what she told herself to make her heart stop wrenching. She ran a hand over Naruto's face for a moment and sensed that there was something a bit different with his blood flow and quickly laid him back down onto the bed, while doing a quick diagnostic of the blonde's body. There was something a bit strange with his heart and blood flow as she first sensed. She motioned for Karin and Kuretsuchi towards the boy and gave the two girls a look that said, "You know what to do." Karin placed her hands over Naruto's chest and started channeling chakra onto his chest while Tsunade knocked the boy out for the operation. Kuretsuchi held Naruto down and channeled chakra into Karin to help the redhead with her healing. Tsunade cut open the boy's chest to reveal mushed organs and even still, cracked ribs and even punctures in the lungs. Tsunade looked to both Karin and Kuretsuchi with wide eyes. What the hell happened to him? Tsunade said in a near roar. His body has never been this bad before. He fell. Karin replied meekly. Into a giant cavern in the desert, Kuretsuchi added. He was about to summon something from the chakra that I was able to read, but the walls of the cavern were covered in seals I think, and the seals absorbed his chakra and he simply fell to the ground face first. Karin sighed. So we tried to heal him after being captured by the bandits in the desert and we ended up finding Kuretsuchi and Naruto. A broken rib ended up getting lodged into Naruto's aorta and Kuretsuchi and I had to heal him. She used this technique called the Heart of Stone or something and she ended up making out with Naruto on the side. Way to spill every detail. Kuretsuchi stomped on Karin's foot and the two ended up butting heads and glared lightning bolts into each other's eyes. Don't tempt me, Firehead. You shouldn't tempt me either, Stone. Karin growled. Tsunade deadpanned at the interaction. This wasn't the way they should be acting, especially since Naruto needed their help. This was almost as bad as Ino and Sakura, and these two girls didn't even know each other outside of a few days ago. The Hokage shook her head and started channeling chakra into Naruto's body and started reforming the bone and the organs back to their original form. After all, it was getting gross to look at with all of the flesh turned into mush. No more than 15 minutes passed and Naruto was back on his feet smiling and laughing, filling the room with light and happiness. But Karin sensed something else within the boy. The Kyuubi was starting to flow more and more of its chakra into his system. Karin was able to tell that the smile spread on Naruto's face wasn't real, rather, it was yet another mask that the boy created so no one would worry about him. With nothing left to do in the room, everyone was quickly whisked away towards the massive arena on the western wing of the building. On the outside, Naruto and Karin were able to see a large band of shinobi from all nations escorting another even larger group of bandits from the desert with their hands on their heads. The shinobi had masks on covering their faces, giving no distinction between the different shinobi, but their clothing gave their nationality away. Karin tilted her head as she stared out into the desert, stopping in the middle of the hall. Naruto stopped as well and looked out the window wondering what the girl was on about, but he couldn't tell what she was so mesmerized about. Not wanting to find out, Naruto quickly grabbed her and dragged her towards the doors down the hall. There were about 15 other teams built up at the door with them waiting with their sensei and teammates. Naruto raised an eyebrow and looked to see Kuretsuchi and her team standing at the door with small smiles on their faces. Naruto and Karin nodded at the Iowa team and took their place at the front of the door. All heads were snapped to the Junin in charge and awaited instruction. Suddenly, behind all the teams, the hall shut off as a pair of doors slammed closed behind them. Naruto turned to Karin and visibly gulped, letting the redhead know of his nervousness. His bright blue eyes scanned the contestants in the room wondering what was going on, but the ground shook beneath them and they all started to rise. Naruto looked back to Karin to see her with a raised eyebrow. She narrowed her eyes and gave the blonde a subtle nod before fixing her glasses. She ran a hand through her unkempt side of her hair and stepped closer to Naruto. She too scanned the room with her crimson eyes. Kuretsuchi and her team were doing the exact same with Akatsuchi behind Hiro and Kuretsuchi. They wanted to make sure that they wouldn't be ambushed in the dark. But just as their nerves started grating at their sanity, light started to pour through the darkness, illuminating the room. Naruto sighed in relief, but only Karin heard it. The redhead let a small smile grace her dirty face and looked up to Naruto to see him already sweating. That's not a good sign. Karin thought. That is definitely not a good sign. Something must be getting to Naruto if he's already sweating. I doubt it's that he killed someone, it has to be the Kyuubi at work here. If only Karin hadn't been so right. Naruto's heart rate was racing as the Kyuubi thrashed in its cage. There was also nothing Kushina could do. With the cage in the way, Kushina couldn't shoot her chakra chains out and bind the Kyuubi once again. The only way for the fox to calm down was for Naruto to control the damn beast and tame it. Naruto was struggling for control of his body and was afraid that the fox would take over his body during the finals, which was something that was preferred not to happen. As of now, Kushina was shouting at the Kyuubi to calm down and trying to hold the cage sealed with whatever power she had left without disappearing. Disappearing wasn't part of the plan, and that was something that Kushina was trying her hardest to avoid. Naruto was going to need her later on if he were to take on the Kyuubi. The Uzumaki knew it, but Naruto didn't. Now, the doors swung open, revealing another arena filled with sand and stands that shot up in the air with people filling every seat. There were 5 sections, and each section was segregated by village and nationality that the people were from. Naruto and Karin looked up to see the largest section that had the flags of Konoha and Hai no Kuni waving in the wind above. In the stands they immediately recognized the Konoha 11. All were present to cheer the two on, along with Konohamaru, who had apparently made it to the final round of the test. Ino was cheering the loudest of the 9, scaring a few of the Chunin and Junin with her cries. Ino made sure Naruto could see her, and once the two made eye contact, the blonde bombshell gave him a not-so-subtle wink and even blew him a kiss for good luck. Karin clenched her fist and glared at Ino with her lens getting some serious glare from the rays of the sun above. Naruto laughed out and gave Ino a smirk and waved softly, letting the girl know he got her gifts. Naruto and the rest of the finalists walked off towards the center of the arena with Iwa, Kumo and 3 Suna teams along with Konohamaru standing at their sides. All of them stood silently and stared awkwardly at one another as they waited for some kind of order to happen. Naruto looked to Karin with a look that asked it all. Karin wasn't even able to respond as a large explosion went off at the front of the arena. Karin looked to Naruto with confusion evident on her face. Karin was waiting for a response, but she was suddenly thrown to the ground by Naruto. The boy shot up with a kunai and blocked a flurry of shuriken. Naruto then hurled the same kunai at their attackers and grabbed Karin off the ground and charged away from a fireball flying at them. What the hell is going on? Karin screamed out as an earth jutsu exploded just a few meters away. What are we supposed to be doing right now? I think it's a free-for-all match right now. We need to survive for a certain amount of time, I guess. Naruto replied over some explosions and roaring applause. Come on then. Karin jumped away from Naruto with her chakra flaring in all directions, sensing everything and anything that was on its way towards her or Naruto. A kunai laced with Raiden chakra was flying towards her, but she drew out a kunai and blocked the projectile and even managed to calculate the right angle at which she had to block it at to send the attack right back at the owner. Karin ducked as an Iwa genin with rock fists held together with chakra whizzed above her. With a quick thought, she shot her kunai up and dug the knife into the genin's gut and quickly pulled out to make sure not to kill the kid. Karin was so preoccupied with the genin that she didn't realize that there was another Iwa genin underneath her. Within a split second, dirt shot up around the girl and she was suddenly grabbed underground with only her head still visible. The genin had a knife at her face and Karin quickly surrendered. The genin that had her hostage was suddenly blown away by a weak version of the Rasengan. Karin looked up to see Naruto with a large cloud of blue chakra floating around him. The blonde looked down and tried his best to stifle a laugh when he saw the predicament that Karin was in. He was about to pull her out, until Karin told him that she had already surrendered. The blonde giggled softly and shook his head and turned back around for the fight at hand. Karin felt a weird sensation was pulled from the dirt and led from the arena to the competitor's box. Down in the arena, there were about 15 other shinobi left and the numbers were quickly dropping. Naruto was now surrounded by two teams of Kumo shinobi. They had their swords and kunai drawn intent on kicking the blonde of Konoha from the finals as quickly as possible. Just before they could attack, they heard a powerful shout from the stands. It was Ino roaring for him to kick their asses. Naruto laughed loudly, dropping his guard. One of the Kumo shinobi saw this as an opportunity and charged forward with his sword aimed right for Naruto's side. The boy though was stabbed quite painfully. The Kumo shinobi pulled his blade from Naruto's abdomen, but popped into a large cloud of smoke. A shadow clone. One of them shouted in fear. Yes, a shadow clone indeed. Naruto shouted in excitement. He dashed from underneath one of the larger Kumo shinobi and rammed his fist into his chin much like what he did to Neji in the first Chunin exams that he had participated in. With the larger Kumo shinobi down, Naruto spun on his heel and charged for one of the other larger ones, engaging in a powerful bout of taijutsu, matching the boy fist for fist, and kick for kick. Neither was getting close to a victory as they continued to fight. Naruto though found the opening and sent his fist up, smashing his knuckles into the side of the genin's face, sending the boy flying over into the dirt, knocked out completely. The blonde landed on his feet and faced the rest of the shinobi. They too charged forward, but instead of one by one, they came in a mob, blocking every exit and even escape that Naruto could possibly have. Let's make this fight a little even, shall we? Naruto threw up the cross hand seal and suddenly, 20 Naruto clones popped into existence and took up fighting positions. The Kumo shinobi were undeterred and continued their charge at the boy. Naruto shook his head and jumped up, smashing his foot into the face of another large genin and landed with his fist lodging into the side of another genin. He quickly backed away as a raging kunoichi dashed for him, swinging her blade left and right, up and down, in an attempt to at least graze his face with her blade. Naruto though, wasn't about to have any of that and called upon Sage Chakra in a quick millisecond, just before the sword hit his face. He smashed the sword completely and kicked the girl away just as fast. Naruto landed on his feet and paced back a few yards to get away from the shinobi that targeted him. All of them froze in their tracks when they saw his eyes and sensed his power. Karin gasped when she realized that the boy was already in Sage mode. But what surprised her even more was that the Sage mode chakra was started to flow from his body, almost as if Naruto was forcing it from his system. I will fight all of you fair and square. Naruto said suddenly. Using this power is like cheating. Slowly but surely, the Senjutsu chakra was funneled from his body and back into the land around him. Having never done something like that before in his entire life as a sage, it was rough. At least the genin that he was fighting against knew that he was trying to give them a fighting chance. Naruto finally got all of the sage chakra from his system completely removed and faced his opponents with a defiant eye. But before he could even lift a finger to fight them, they were all blasted back by none other than Konohamaru and his Rasengan. Naruto smirked and burst out into laughter, causing a few of the audience in the stands to look at the blonde with a questionable look. Konohamaru pile drove through the shinobi, taking all of them out of commission at once. A large smile grew on Naruto's face and he quickly charged off to take on Konohamaru. But before he could get to Konohamaru, there was a powerful blare of a whistle and Naruto and two other shinobi froze, including Konohamaru. Their three heads looked up to the stands and found all 5 cages standing at the head of the platform with their gazes staring at the contenders at the bottom below. There was a great silence in the crowd as they watched in silent anticipation of what was to come. All eyes were on the 3 remaining contenders. Naruto looked around and found that it was Konohamaru, himself and of course, Kuratsuchi. This wasn't going to be pretty. The crowds could even see that it wasn't going to be a great picture. At least it would be fun to watch the 3 kids go at each other with all of their power. The entire arena was quiet for a good amount of time as medics and other Junin came out from the stands and led the wounded and unconscious shinobi from the arena floor and into the infirmary or the stands, leaving Naruto, Kuretsuchi and Konohamaru in the middle to stare at each other with nervous eyes and looks. Naruto thought to himself and suddenly realized that the final exam was going by so much smoother than what had happened with his first go-around. Then again, we were suddenly attacked from all sides and even from within by so many shinobi. Naruto looked around with a nervous eye. He wasn't expecting any surprises to spring from any part of the arena to take on all of the Kage villages at once. I wouldn't be surprised if the Akatsuki pulled some bullshit like that. With a war coming soon, they'll need all the cards that we already have neutralized. After all, they are down by how many members? Almost all of them except for the masked one, right? Wait, the Venus flytrap one. What did they call him? A Zetsu, right? Yeah, a Zetsu. There were clones of him at the river in the Land of Iron. I know I can make clones, but they weren't like the Zetsu's clones. There was something different about them, almost as if they were completely animate and almost a completely different sentience. Naruto started looking around as the silence continued to flow throughout the arena, drowning all sound. If the Akatsuki find a way to multiply that thing into more and full-bodied beings, then the Alliance might have an actual challenge ahead of them. Suddenly, the silence was broken with a thunderous applause that scared Naruto from his thoughts and almost had him rolling into the sand for defense. At least no one in the audience saw him freak out. Naruto fixed his position and looked up to see Gaara with his hand raised. The people of Suna were screaming out his name in excitement and even a few Konoha shinobi joined in. Naruto straightened up and walked next to Kuretsuchi and Konohamaru with himself being the median to the two shinobi. This fight shall continue after a 30-minute reprise. Gaara called out. The people groaned and so did the wounded contestants. Karin and Ino shouted out their disapproval since they wanted to see Naruto kick some hell. Everyone wanted to see the boy hailed as the hero of the leaf kick some, that was the reason they came after all. Naruto, Kuretsuchi and Konohamaru walked off towards the contenders' room and sat on different benches while being served ice-cold water and bowls of food. That was some interesting strategy that you had there, Kono. Naruto smirked. To tell you the truth, I'm surprised that you even made it this far. Thanks for the vote of confidence, Naruto Ni-chan. Konohamaru deadpanned. It doesn't matter now. Kuretsuchi smirked. Neither of you will win this. And what makes you so sure of yourself? Naruto smiled. After all, I am by far the strongest one of the three of us. I'll force those words down your gullet, minion. Kuretsuchi growled menacingly. You won't know what hit you in this fight. Naruto shivered silently, hoping he didn't piss off the Iwa Kunoichi. His mother snickered while the Kyuubi simply sighed. The blonde looked left and right, seeing his two companions completely entranced by their food. Rolling his eyes, he went back to eating his food as fast as possible. Besides, he needed to take a mega piss as soon as possible. He threw down his wooden bowl and charged off for the nearest restroom to relieve his already overfilled bladder. With a quick motion, he managed to empty his entire amount of piss just in less than 10 minutes, leaving him with about 15 minutes left to take a quick power nap. He smirked softly and turned to wash his hands, but there was a sudden feeling residing within him, almost as if his stomach was about to turn over. Then his body froze and his muscles clenched almost as if he were holding in a powerful fart. Soon enough, he let loose and the ungodliest rumble shook the restroom. Having been around the smell of rotting flesh or even cut open bodies, the smell didn't affect him, but suddenly from the 5 stalls that were in the restroom, out came 5 men holding their pants up with their right hands and holding their left hands against their faces to ease the pain. Naruto took a step but suddenly felt a strange solid, but liquid sensation coming from his rear. He took another step thinking it to be nothing, but it started again and this time it was warm and wet liquid. Naruto swallowed the lump in his throat and took a deep nervous breath, knowing full well that this was a terrible situation to be in. It was almost as bad as the time he hanged as Sasuke 4 years ago in his failed attempt to court Sakura. Naruto upped the uncomfortable feeling and practically made a mad dash for the nearest stall and threw his pants down around his ankle and smashed his butt onto the toilet seat, letting all of the shit build up from 4 days of no shitting into the toilet, filling the room with the most appalling scent. At this point Naruto felt something wanting to go out through his throat. It was just so gross to the boy. Outside, 20 minutes later, Konohamaru and Kuretsuchi were standing awkwardly with a proctor in the center of the arena. It had been 5 minutes after the set time for break and the people were getting restless. Tsunade was sweating bullets but no more so than Karin and Ino. The two girls were biting their nails and were making deep glares at the arena in the spot where Naruto was supposed to be. Some of the daimyos were even thinking that the boy had ditched and chose to quit the competition, something that the cages couldn't afford, since Naruto was one of the prize fighters in this Chunin exam. With the help and funds from the daimyos, the alliance would be able to get the supplies they need. Having Naruto still in the fight would make the daimyos want to help the shinobi in their plight. Suddenly, from within the arena below, out came a red-faced and sweat-covered Naruto, trying his hardest to keep his pants held up. In his rush to get back to the arena, he had accidentally popped his button from his pants, and since he doesn't wear a belt, he had no alternative other than to hold his pants up manually. He arrived in the arena and took a deep breath, trying his hardest to regain his dignity. Ino and Karin quickly sunk into their seats, especially since Naruto was the guy they were cheering for the entire time. People around them, even the Konoha 11, were laughing. Looking back down, Naruto tried his hardest not to look embarrassed, but it was kind of hard, especially with his mother laughing maniacally within his mind. Even the Kyuubi joined in, calling him a rat. Naruto gave the proctor a look and the proctor quickly got the message. The man brought up his arms and the crowd quickly silenced and allowed the proctor to give out the rules. The cages sat up after relieving themselves of their laughter and stood firm. Ino and Karin sat up once more in their seats, hoping to get a good fight from the blonde boy they both liked so much. The rules of this final fight are simple. Use every weapon of your arsenal, be it Kekkei Genkei Tota, or even extra chakra abilities, such as Sage Mode. The proctor said, killing again is allowed, but it would be in your best interests to not kill each other. Begin. The proctor jumped back as far as he could as Konohamaru and a clone rushed forward with a Rasengan blaring in their hands. Naruto was surprised by the boy's audacity and merely watched as the Rasengan exploded and tore through the arena floor. Kuretsuchi back-flipped and landed softly while speeding through her own set of hand seals for her own ninjutsu. Naruto saw this and charged ahead with a Rasengan in his own hands and smashed the ground beneath the girl with the attack, knocking her back. He didn't intend to kill her, or even damage her all that badly, maybe just knock her out. The boy sent a punch for her temple, but Kuro ducked and kicked Naruto back, unknowingly saving the boy from Konohamaru's explosive dust attack. The resulting explosion sent Kuretsuchi into the wall of the arena and Naruto through the ground and into the wall on the opposite side of the arena. Kono panted violently knowing that he was coming close to losing. He saw Kuretsuchi already recovered and charging right for him with the intent to kill. The Iwa Kunoichi jumped up and sent her heel down for Konohamaru's head, but the Sarutobi rolled over to his side, dodging the attack at the most perfect moment. Kuro's foot was lodged into the ground for a good few seconds before she managed to completely recover. She was ready to kill the boy for dodging and evading him and nearly beating her more than once. Kuro wasn't going to be beaten by a 12-year-old with the voice of a kid half that age. She charged for Konohamaru and punched him square in the face, sending him back into the ground, bouncing violently a few feet away. Konohamaru struggled to fight back, but still tried his best. Meanwhile, Naruto was struggling to get his left leg from the sleeve of his pants that happened to wrap around his ankles. At least he was wearing his black boxer shorts. It would have become quite problematic if he decided to wear his white boxer shorts. All the while, the boy was cursing under his breath knowing that he was about to embarrass himself more than any other shinobi in the history of shinobi kind. With his left leg completely free from the pants, he dashed forward with only his boxers covering his legs and private parts. The crowd went wild with laughter. Ino and Karin face-faulted and placed their faces against the chairs in front of them. Tsunade burst into a dangerous laughter with her almost losing breath, and the cages like I and Unoki burst into laughter as well. I can't believe that this is the kid that bowed to me in Tetsu no Kuni. I thought to himself. Kids got spunk. Kuretsuchi and Konohamaru were completely confused with the sudden uproar and turned their attention to the pantsless shinobi charging for them with his eyes focused on them only. Konohamaru started laughing despite the pain he felt, and it soon spread to Kuretsuchi. She struggled to keep her emotions in and suddenly gave Naruto the opening he needed. The blonde shot forward with chakra coming off of his legs, and the boy smashed his fist into Kuretsuchi's face, sending her bouncing back into the same wall, same spot as she was before. Konohamaru gasped in relief and was helped to his feet with his head still ringing. Naruto gave him a look and pulled the boy he saw as a little brother close and stared him in his brown eyes. Quit. This isn't a fight that you can fight yet. Konohamaru, listen to your Ni-chan just this instance. I'd rather not see you get hurt more than you already are. Naruto said in a calm voice. But, you're still young, Konohamaru. Besides, after what you probably experienced in the second stage of the test, I doubt that you'd like to go to war. Naruto added. Fine. Konohamaru sighed with a broken heart. Proctor, I surrender from the fight. Before Konohamaru could disappear, he flashed Naruto a thumbs up and started pointing at something. Naruto was confused and followed his eyes to the back of his boxers and found a large light brown stain that went up and down the rear. Naruto's face went hot as a powerful red blush covered his entire face. He snapped towards the opposite direction and watched as Kuretsuchi pushed herself from the wall. Kuretsuchi was huffing and puffing out of frustration. I am embarrassing my people and my family. Kuretsuchi glared menacingly at the last Konoha shinobi left in the arena. I am getting tossed around like a ragdoll by a child. Now I have to fight Naruto-kun, damn it. I will not surrender. Uganden no Jutsu. Kuretsuchi sent forth a powerful barrage of lava bullets that cooled into rock bullets. Naruto's blue eyes went wide as the projectiles came rushing for him at nearly lightning speeds. With a quick summoning of Senjutsu chakra, he grabbed each projectile in midair and spun around on the heel of his foot, and hurled the rocks back at their owner at the near same speed as she did. In the midst of her confusion, Naruto dashed forward while calling in as much Senjutsu chakra as he could before they closed the distance. Now, Naruto jumped forward and sent his fist forward, but Kuretsuchi dodged it. Little did she know, she didn't actually dodge the attack. An invisible force smashed into the side of her face, sending her in a different wall this time. Kuretsuchi was hyperventilating from frustration at this point and pushed herself from the wall with fire burning in her eyes. I dodged that attack, damn it. Kuretsuchi glared at Naruto, knowing that words couldn't and shouldn't be spoken at this time. I'll get him this time. Sekaigyo no Jutsu. A large blast of quicklime shot from her mouth and launched towards Naruto, but the boy managed to jump away in time. Kuretsuchi knew that he'd do that and jumped as high as she could and sped through yet another set of hand seals and held her hand up to her mouth. Sweden. Mizoripa. A large blast of water shot from her mouth and nearly hit Naruto on a few occasions, but because of his Senjutsu chakra, he was able to catch onto the warpath of the attack and managed to weave around the large stream of water. In the midst of Kuretsuchi's blind rage, she didn't realize that Naruto made a team of Senjutsu-enhanced clones. Without a spoken word, the clones hurled the real him up into the air while one of the clones left behind distracted the still descending girl. Naruto, still in sage mode, formed a Rasengan as he closed into on the girl. She formed another set of hand seals and shot forward yet another Mizoripa, this time, making sure she got Naruto, or at least what she thought was Naruto. Meanwhile, Naruto closed in and slammed the Rasengan into her back and forced her into the ground below, smashing her 2 feet into the dirt. The blonde landed softly and turned back around before realizing that he was still devoid of pants. He took a deep breath to make sure that he wasn't about to embarrass himself yet again and walked up to the hole that Kuratsuchi was embedded within. The entire crowd was silent while some started snickering when they saw the light brown shit stains on the back of his boxers. Ino and Karin watched with bated breath as the shinobi came closer to one of the most powerful adversaries that he'd fought since Pain. Naruto looked into the hole to see that Kuratsuchi was indeed knocked out. Naruto looked to the proctor as he checked her vitals and gave Naruto a nod. The proctor took the boy's hand and raised it up into the air, and with a big smile and an even bigger voice, he called out Naruto Uzumaki as the winner of the Chunin exams of Sunagaku. All the while, Kuratsuchi was carefully pried from the hole she was embedded within. Damn it, I overdid it, again.